Alright, hello again to anyone watching these Kaijudo videos. Today I'm here with the second match that I played in the Rangers Dojo Discord tournament. So this is, of course, round 2, and the format is open, but with Eye of the Storm legal, which was the unreleased set. So basically just every card that was ever created is legal, and Bottle of Wishes is the one card that is restricted to only one copy. But I, of course, did not play any Eye of the Storm cards in my deck. I just played Lightwater Fire Dragons with the Oathsworn Call. So if you're interested in a more in-depth explanation, I believe I profiled pretty much this exact list way back, I think 7 or 8 months ago on the channel. It was the first video I actually posted. I think there's one change, which was trimming the second Awaken for a Twin Cannon. But aside from that, again, I talked a little bit more about the deck in the previous match in round 1, and of course in that deck profile video, so I won't go too in-depth on the list here, but this is the deck I've played in the tournament. And my opponent's deck is Lightwater Nature Arboreus. So I am actually playing against Andross, who is also a member, of course, of the Rangers Dojo Discord, and at least he has been since the time that I joined. So he's actually one of the players that I've talked to probably the most out of the members there, or one of them at least. He's one of the few people that I've talked to the most, and this was a deck he actually posted within a week or two of the event. I think a little bit after I had posted my Eye of the Storm set review talking about Arboreus, he posted this list. Not to say I really created the deck or inspired the deck necessarily. I believe that Arboreus and this kind of shell was already something Andross himself had played with before while playing with Eye of the Storm cards, and maybe it just inspired him to share the list that he had and he was working on. And I think myself and a couple other members, including Andross, we sort of discussed through some of the card choices, nothing major or anything, but we talked through, and this was kind of the pretty close to the final version that we came up with in the Discord, and that's the deck he ended up registering. I think he's got a bunch of the 2-drops here, the Water Nature 2-drops, just to support the Arboreus, give him the multi-civ bait for it. And they're totally Bronze Arm Renegade, at least, is a pretty solid card in and of itself, a decent 2-drop, a card that's seen play as a 2-drop in other decks in the past, for sure, so it's totally reasonable. Wavebreaker Tribe, also a fine card. And going heavier on 2-drops is nice when you have all these multi-civs, so you can just you can kind of sequence in your tap mana on turn 3 and still make a play. So that's really beneficial. He's of course got just a lot of the standard stuff: Turnip and Laws, Cyber Scamp, Finbar and Lyra, going heavy on those to make use of Arboreus pretty well. And yeah, I think some of the more specific card choices, Jarbala Hatchery was a card I recommended. It's definitely not going to be at its best in this matchup. It's really good in, I think, the back and forth games that you play with other aggressive decks where you have a bunch of extra resources, extra cards at your disposal, and it lets you make just multiple plays really well. Like if your opponent's returning stuff to your hand, you can just redeploy them super easily with Hatchery. So I think Hatchery is just a nice card in other matchups. Also, just even still, just a great bait for Arboreus in the sense that it can kind of operate as that 1-drop sort of prickleback type card where you can drop it alongside Arboreus in the same turn, and you only really need one creature to be in play. It could be even like a Turnip that your opponent can't remove, and you can just drop Arboreus out of nowhere. So that could be a nice application of the card too, without having to play those kind of mediocre 1-mana cards like prickleback to begin with. So I like Jarbala Hatchery for that, but again, this is not going to be really the matchup for it. When we're playing these lower resource games, I'm just going to be sitting back as a dragon player, just trying to stabilize and go over the top with my dragons. I'm not really going to be giving him the extra resources to make use of Hatchery. And he's not super hard on card draw either, outside of after he's landed a Finbar or Arboreus or something along those lines later in the game. But he's not filled to the brim with Broodmothers and Cephalias and other cards like that. So again, not going to be at its best here, but I think a totally reasonable card. Ironwood Tree is another nice card too, just a blocker, cheap blocker that you can deploy in those aggressive matchups, but then also just does a really good job protecting your power cards from discard spells like Mesmerize out of your opponent. So a pretty good build. Another card that I think Andross first had in his deck was Oathsworn Call, but I think it's right to go with Piercing instead. Oathsworn's like a pretty nice Shield Blast, of course, but Piercing's also just a great Shield Blast in its own way, and like Oathsworn's really appealing with all the 6-drops when you're going hard on that direction, but I mean, Piercing's just the interaction you need. So one of the downsides to this list in specific is moving away from Blinder Beetle Prime or even Homunculon especially, which is going to be a card I played in a lot of these decks in some numbers. Moving away from those, you're a little bit slimmer on interaction, so I think trimming Piercing Judgment as well, especially cheap interaction. Like, you still have Finbar and Lyra's, but you kind of need it turn 4 or 5. 6 is a little bit too late, especially when you're looking at playing against a deck like Dragons, for example. Like, I think it's too much to trim the Piercings as well. Because it really banks on your opponent being another aggressive deck. Like, Oathsworn can be great interaction, but only when it's like kind of in your shields and you have it against an aggressive deck for the most part. So Piercing just a much more stable all-around card. So I think it's deserving of the slot. But again, in this specific matchup, missing Swordhorn, lacking Anjak, I think honestly, like, Arboreus is probably a downgrade from Anjak in general. Like, Anjak's just a lot easier to utilize. Doesn't require quite the amount of warping to your deck build to your deck to support it. It's just much easier to land, so it's a much more consistent card. Like, especially if you're trying to combat dragons with like a big body like Anjak, I think it's just a little bit easier to utilize. Blinder Beetle Prime, of course, just also great interaction, but requires different levels of support, and Swordhorn can support both of those different evolution creatures really well too. So I think missing that card in general, just a great part of a lot of these Lightwater Nature decks' typical game plan versus Dragons. So, I mean, Swordhorn just makes Piercing so incredible in that deck, especially in this matchup. So I think missing some of those key cards, like I mentioned, Homunculon, BBP, and Jack, Swordhorn, I think it's going to be a bit of a liability in this matchup. His game plan, I think, for Andross, I tested the matchup beforehand, and I did feel like I was pretty favored. But I think the best game plan Andross can go for is just try to land those early creatures. He has to get aggressive despite my defensive Shield Blast. I think he just has to try to get under me. And then ideally, best case scenario is when I land my Herald or something along those lines, he can swallow up those small creatures that would be liabilities to Herald underneath an Arboreus and just start beating me over the head to close out the game with that Arboreus. Because, I mean, Arboreus is a pretty difficult card for me to answer, even with things like Sky Crusher going on. I mean, Sky Crusher plus Lyra can answer it, but if he's got enough other things going on, that might be not be enough to close out the game. So, or fully stabilize. But yeah, I think that's generally the game plan he's going to go for, but he's really going to need to see the interactive spells like Rusalka Piercing, and he's going to need to see his Arboreus to have a shot in this matchup. So I think that's a fair breakdown in general, so we'll get into the first game here. So I was lucky enough to win the die roll, which is very important in this matchup. Being able to, I mean, just being able to get the opportunity to untap with a bird can be a big deal. All of the interaction coming out of Andross's deck are going to be minimum 4 mana, so if I play a Nyx on turn 3, I'm going to be able to untap and play it like a dragon on turn 4, for example. So that's just going to be really key. Piercing's still good going second, of course, to like bounce back that Herald, tap the Nyx and kill it, for example, but it starts putting him on the defensive when he's needing to react to my birds and things like that, rather than advancing his own game plan per se. On top of that, if he doesn't have like Piercing to kill the Nyx and bounce the Herald, then of course I'm threatening jump jets to where, like, if he just Rusalkas back the Herald and tries to make an attack, I can obviously Herald jump jets. So just being on the play is super important. Of course, I'm not really seeing the birds, and I opened a kind of clunky hand, but I still have Corral plus Oathsworn Call, which is going to be a really nice package to have. And I believe I draw Herald here, which just makes my hand that much better. So yeah, I set the Oathsworn Call. Pick up a Lyra, which is really good too. So just a great exchange there. Just being able to, like the Core Isle effect of just being that draw and discard to smooth out my hand, already pretty nice to have that early creature that can trade off and do that, while also setting a shield at the same time that can be a potent blast is just a really nice effect. So that's kind of like the exact reason I play the one of Coriel. So I'm not going to say that happens every time, but it's just nice to have that one extra cheap creature to play to smooth out your hands a little bit more often, and then just mitigate aggro a little bit. So here, Andross plays Cyber Scamp. This turn I'm not too sure on. Like maybe, I just feel like this is a little awkward keeping the multi-civ Wavebreaker tribe in hand. I'm not sure what the best play is, but it just feels like when you do this, you might be consigning this Lyra to mana in order to make this piercing play that you might potentially make on the following turn. Or maybe you top deck a Rusalka and now you have to like throw the Lyra down to play the Rusalka, or maybe throw the Rusalka down to play the piercing or something like that. You don't get to keep all the good stuff in your hand because you have this Wavebreaker tribe, so I feel like it might be better to just hold the Arbiter instead, or maybe even just play the Wavebreaker instead of Scamp. But I mean, one of the benefits to playing Wavebreaker instead of Scamp is, I mean, that kind of plays around Kyo coming out of the shields, which would just blow out this, just destroy this Cyber Scamp outright, and then that'd be kind of bad. Whereas if you have Wavebreaker tribe, it's not quite as bad. So yeah, that's an argument, I guess. But Scamp at the same time would just be great, but even piercing, like even if he breaks Shield Blast piercing, like I could just bounce this, tap the Scamp, and then kill the Scamp with Core Isle. Like I don't know which one is what the right exact play is. There's a lot of things to weigh, but I feel like I might have just tried to get this Wavebreaker out of hand instead, but at the same time it might not even matter because I'm probably going to make this trade here. So it doesn't really matter too much when you're considering like the mana considerations there. So here I think I drew Stormspark, which was not great, and I decided to trade. Not confident in this play. Obviously, I just kind of wanted to reduce the pressure as much as I could. Giving him the mana does suck, but I just wanted to eliminate his board presence as much as I could. And one of the things I was weighing too was just maybe it would be better, like I'd prefer him to have that extra bit of pressure in play, but if he ends up playing an Arboreus a couple turns down the line, maybe like what happens is like, I don't know, something like maybe he wouldn't end up playing an extra creature down or something, and then I play Herald, and then he bounces the Herald, and then he can land. Like maybe there's some way it plays out where that extra creature makes it awkward for him, where at some point when he does land his Arboreus, he might have to leave a residual small creature in play that I can punish with this Herald Jump Jets. But I just really didn't see like necessarily that playing out exactly that way, and I felt like it was just better to take off the pressure because I have double Lyra to help me stabilize and buy some time. Like I could even just land a Lyra on an Arboreus or something along those lines, and then land another one, and then maybe try to squeeze the game out with a race type game plan with this Herald Jump Jets. Like I felt like I had enough tools going on. The Oathsworn Call down in shields too. Like I just wanted to eliminate the pressure more than anything else, rather than trying to get fancy with maybe leaving a creature in play. Like I just didn't think it was necessary. I think there was just enough other ways where it plays out where that's not the case, and he could just not have Arboreus anyways. So I don't know. Not really sure what. Maybe it was bad to give him that extra mana though. So not confident in that play. But here, I have just a really nice hand for this spot. Unfortunately, I drew Piercing because I would have liked to draw an untapped mana so I could keep both these Lyras in my hand. But as it plays out now, I'm just going to probably mana this Lyra and deploy Herald. And then he's in a tough spot because if he has Lyra or Piercing to shut down the Herald, and then he'll probably make an attack alongside that, and then I can just Jump Jets Herald, especially if I find a big dragon. So I'm pretty well set up here, which is of course why I keep the second Herald rather than the second Lyra. So yeah, he's kind of in a tricky spot now. But I think it's pretty. For me, I think it's pretty clear to just play the Lyra, tap the Herald, and then just break as many shields as you can here. Maybe I could see like what he's considering. Maybe is he's worried about War Chief Kyo, for example, like a War Chief Kyo, and then he breaks the shields. That could be pretty brutal for him. So maybe that's like the argument for not. So that would make sense as an argument for not breaking it. But I mean, if you're gonna play around War Chief Kyo, you should probably also just be attacking in the opposite order there. And War Chief Kyo is still pretty tough for him, anyways. So I think the bigger deal probably is like considering jump jets. I think like for one, like Lyra on one hand, like Lyra is just probably the default like kind of heuristic there is that's just better is to just use your mana more effectively and just add to your board at the same time as you're disrupting. It's probably just generally better. And then kind of respecting Kyo maybe in that spot by bouncing the Herald is fine, but at the same time, when you just bounce the Herald, now all I need is the jump jets, and I can just go Herald jump jets and drop a big dragon. Whereas if you Lyra, I need Herald plus jump jets. But then maybe you'd run the odds, and maybe it's more likely that I have either Kyo and shields plus Herald and jump jets together than it is that I just have jump jets. So maybe that's the feeling there. But I think at the same time, like, I don't know. I just feel like it's just better. Like, you're in this position, I feel like you give up a little bit too much tempo by just not committing the Lyra to play. Maybe you get fancy and play the Lyra and not attack with anything. But at that point, and then like maybe you wait to the following turn to piercing back the Herald if you're worried about Kyo. Especially if maybe you're worried about Kyo in this shield. But even then, like, that's kind of weak to me just dropping my Lyra on your Lyra. So I don't know. I feel like you have to get aggressive and just kind of drop the Lyra there regardless. Like, you need that extra board presence in my opinion. But I could be off there. But yeah, of course, I was super lucky as well. I mean, maybe not super lucky, but I was lucky to find this this Andromeda of the Citadel that I can drop, which is of course just an incredible card to find. And I'm able to jump jets. But I mean, there was a bunch of dragons I could find that were good. Like, even just dropping Lyra is pretty strong. If I found General Sky Crusher, that would be fine too. And then I still have the Oathsworn Call down now as well to even back this up with the Lyra in hand. So it's looking pretty grim. And unfortunately, Andross just didn't find the Arboreus. I mean, if he had Arboreus the previous turn, like, that would have been his window against my Herald, is just to find Arboreus. That would have been a great draw for him, but he kind of whiffed on that, unfortunately. And yeah. So he's going to Lyra now, but it's like in this position, like, you really would have preferred to have the yeah, you probably would have preferred to have the Lyra in play, and then like the piercing in hand means you could just like bounce the Herald or the Andromeda this turn and try to break all the shields. Maybe hope that this Oathsworn Call that I set was just like a bluff or something along those lines, but as it is now, it's going to be a pretty difficult game to win, and of course I can just Lyra his Lyra. I mean, maybe I could keep the Lyra for Oathsworn Call, but I feel like it's just better to remove it. I mean, I could even just Lyra the Cyber Scamp to get rid of the Arboreus bait, but I'm not too concerned with Arboreus at this point, especially when it's only drawing cards, not even adding to his board presence. But yeah, thinking about my mana choice, I think But yeah, decide to Lyra anyways. Just not too much can go wrong for me here, to be honest. So he deploys, I untap. I also wanted to just protect my Herald, and then here I get to just play Piercing, return the Andromeda, tap his guy, kill it, drop Andromeda. Now I have 5 shields, huge board. Maybe I could have attacked with Lyra that turn. I think like that would have been a play worth considering, just to make sure I can close out the game next turn easily. So maybe that's a consideration. Like I probably should have just played land drop that turn, just in case like he Piercings out of shields to bounce an Andromeda or something. I could replay it, or I don't know. Maybe I could have attacked, but it doesn't really matter too much. Like I just go for game here, and even have the Kyo back up. And you see he had double Arboreus there at the end out of his shield zone, which was pretty brutal. Like there was that one key turn, like I mentioned earlier, where if he had landed his Arboreus after I had hard cast my Herald on that turn where he decided to Piercing Judgment, if he had just ripped Arboreus there, he would have been in a great position because he gets the Arboreus, attack, drop the Lyra, and go to town on me. But instead whiffed on Arboreus, which just goes to show like the deck when it doesn't draw Arboreus is probably a bit too weak compared to maybe like the light water nature traditional builds, right? And it's harder to land Arboreus at that because it's like much easier to take you off the bait. So even if it's like the other deck is just stronger with more generic tools like Swordhorn and Homunculon, you can play like a more decent game overall, so that you're not as reliant on finding like the key cards like Blinder Beetle Prime and Anjac. But if you do draw that Blinder Beetle Primes and Anjacs, they are easier to line up even than Arboreus. So that kind of shows the downside. But I mean, in that game he did have the window to have it, and you just didn't find it. So tough luck there. Yeah, unfortunate. Both in shields is kind of a bad look when it's one of the key cards for the matchup. So game 2, of course, Andross will be going first. I like this mana decision here. It just opens the door to cast like the other Wavebreaker Tribe or Renegade if he draws it, and it can still cast Scamp if he draws those. And then the rest of the water cards, like maybe Finbar would be like the one water card that you could draw and want to play in mana to have held the Wavebreaker Tribe, and maybe mana Hatchery turn 1. But outside of that, like even if you draw any of the other water cards, Piercing, Rusalkas, those are cards you're probably going to want to hold and mana the Wavebreaker Tribe anyways. So I like that play. Like you'd probably just skip your 2-drop development to keep that Rusalka in hand. So makes sense to play it turn 1. I like that decision, and it ends up paying off big time where he draws a Scamp, so he gets really rewarded for that decision. Here he plays Turnip, so a pretty decent start for him, but breaks a shield. And I believe it's just a random card that I get. I think a Lux or Infernus. No, I think I draw Lux. Yeah, so I draw Lux. I could play the Lux to prevent the Cyber Scamp from attacking, but I just kind of default to playing Nyx to be mana efficient, which makes sense. And I don't think Andross attacks anyways, which sort of makes sense because I think, like I was thinking, like maybe he should just attack to put on the pressure, but then obviously the benefit to not attacking is, of course, he just opens the door to top deck Arboreus again, which is like what he wants to do and what he needs to have happen. So it makes a ton of sense in my mind after the fact to not attack. So I think that's the right play by him. So it didn't really matter too much. So with that in mind, I think Nyx is the right play because it almost like baits him into attacking if he wants to make me make that trade. In which case I'm like fine to make that trade, and then it's actually better for me because it prevents the Arboreus. So it definitely makes a ton of sense on his part to not attack. So I think he's just deciding if he wants to play Hatchery, which playing the Hatchery is another way to kind of guarantee or make it more likely at least that he can land an Arboreus if he top decks it. So that's the reason to play it, because even if I have something like Piercing, of course, like that doesn't do enough. Like I would just bounce the Hatchery, tap the Cyber Scamp, but then he gets to fetch out another Scamp anyways. So he decides to mana it, which definitely makes a lot of sense, I guess. Like Broodmother into Lyra is going to be the draw he wants to have anyways. And he breaks Keel, unfortunately, to punish him. So that kind of stinks for him. Like So yeah, lucky on my part, I get that. So now I don't have to worry about Arboreus at all. And now I get a land Herald, which I top deck as well. So I'm just running really hot here now. Like, Andross missed on Piercing even. Like, he missed on Rusalka to get rid of the Nyx. So now I just get a land Herald on turn 4. And now I have the progression of Nyx and a Herald against his deck. And he's got no board presence. Whiffed on the important cards. So yeah, this is just kind of brutal. Like, if one of these cards, like maybe a more traditional Lightwater Nature deck, instead of having these clunkier Lyras or 6-mana Lyras, they would have a little bit more cheap things maybe, and like Homunculon might take some of those spots, in which case Homunculon would be like a great card here. But yeah, just Broodmothers, whiffs. I think he shows me Piercing when he didn't have to, but whatever. And now I just get a land. Like, yeah, just having this uncontested, like, is just... Any game, you just get to go Nyx into Herald, into Lyra, into Big Dragon. Those are, like, the nut draws from dragons that a lot of the time require getting really lucky in both finding the cards to do it and also your opponent not having any kind of disruption. So, lucky to see that. And we will just put this up here as we watch the game play out. So yeah, he finds Arboreus now, which is obviously a little bit late. Lyra's, and yeah, the game is like pretty much over here too. Like, both games I was able to line up a Herald and drop a Big Dragon off of it, which is the game plan in this matchup, of course. And now it doesn't like matter too much what I do from here on out. Like, I think for a bit, just end up playing a Finbar, probably bouncing back the... I'll probably bounce back the Lyra, and then I probably don't have to attack. I probably don't have to attack at all. I can just keep... Like, I can just Finbar, bounces Lyra, he replays the Lyra, I Finbar again, bounce it back, and then I can just keep building up my board and then do a bunch of shenanigans anyways. And he's kind of locked out of a lot of his top decks, but maybe attacking could get punished. But even then, there's not really much way for me to get punished unless, like, I break, like, Piercing plus Arbiter or something along those lines, and then... like, or maybe hit like double Arbiter, and then he's able to like go 2-drop plus Arboreus or something, and then like, I don't even know, like, there's just not much that he can even do to punish this. So yeah, it's like, I don't know, it's basically just over at this point. So yeah, like, both games, I think like Andross just whiffed on Arboreus when it mattered. I mean, this game he wouldn't have even had the ability to drop Arboreus because of my timely Warchief Keo, the decision to not play Jarbala Hatchery, and of course, like, his lack of Rusalka to remove the Herald. And that's kind of the problem with, like, I mean, he didn't see Piercing either. That's the other card he whiffed on, but so yeah, that all kind of sucks. But I mean, that's kind of the problem with like, that's why I really like Aqua Chaser. Like, Aqua Chaser is just a lot better than Psychic Predator for the most part, especially against dragons when it comes to like removing birds. But it's kind of a metagame thing where they're stronger in different matchups. And I mean, Psychic Predator is better against like Jump Jets, for example, but obviously it's worse against like Warchief Keo, but out of shields at least. And then there are benefits to both, but it's not like he drew Predator anyways that wasn't an Aqua Chaser. He just didn't draw very well. So now I think he yeah, pause for a while. So yeah, that was kind of the downside of Arboreus. It's hard to line up. Like, if it was in, I mean, even if it was like an Anjac, like, yeah, this game was just ridiculous. But I think in general, it just kind of, he was definitely just missing the tools. Like, having these Water Nature 2-drops instead of just generic other 2-drops meant that, like, this Jarbala Hatchery wasn't a Swordhorned, and like, if that was a Swordhorned, it would have been maybe a little bit of a different game, for example. And then like if these Lyras were homunculons, like you kind of see like some of how the game plays out based on the cards he drew. Like a lot of them were just kind of maybe downgrades from like the traditional deck that you have to make to support Arboreus. And I don't know if the payoff is really there. It's at least not in this matchup. Like I haven't tested the Arboreus deck enough to really speak too much on its like broader matchup spread. Like there will be matchups where Hatchery really helps, for example, but for the most part, I think that just Arboreus probably just isn't really worth it compared to a much easier card to utilize like Anjak, or building your early game suite of creatures to support Blinder Beetle Prime. I think both of those cards are a little bit better than Arboreus and easier to utilize, require less deck sacrifices. But and like even though Arboreus maybe is like a really powerful card, it's just like you can never overlook like how big of a downside having to evolve on 2 creatures is. Just like there's so much counterplay and in terms of board presence in these kind of matchups when you're using things like Rusalkas and piercings and all that and Shield Blast, that it's just really hard to land a 5 mana evolution, but Vortex evolution, so not too sure. But yeah, I don't know, I forget if we were talking or what happened here, but we're just waiting for Andross to make a play here. I think the only thing he can literally do is just cast the Lyra. He has no real decision points. He's basically just, dead. I think the one thing that could save him is like double piercing, but I can even play hyperspeed to play around double piercing. But I don't even think I do that. I just play Finbar and bounce it and then just proceed with my life. But I could play hyperspeed and attack with it, and then I don't even lose to piercing judgment. Or ×2. So yeah, just draw. And whoop, all these pop-ups. And yeah. So yeah, that is the game. So yeah, like I talked about, I pretty much summarized a lot of what I wanted to say about the Arboreus deck, and of course Dragons just probably has the edge, and in general I felt like it had the edge in the matchup overall too. So that was the game there. So yeah, this Dragon list, again, what I played in the video, yeah, that was round 2 of the tournament. So I'm 2-0 now, so I will be playing next in the final matchup between myself and I think it's actually going to be Darksigner who I'm playing against from the German Duel Masters community. So I think it'll be a bit of a tougher matchup this time around. He's got similar tools with the piercings and Rusalkas, but he's also playing Blinder Beetles, as he's playing a little bit of a lower to the ground water light aggressive deck. If you want to call it water light tempo, you could call it that for sure, with Blinder Beetle Primes and a lot more problematic cards for me. But we will see how that plays out in the final match that will be soon to come. But outside of that, as always, thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed the commentary, the insight. If you have any of your own thoughts or feedback on the match or anything like that, let me know. But as always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.